Good morning and welcome to sunny Florida. It's great to see all of you here, and I love all of the energy in the room. I know it's a long morning of sitting, but everybody still looks attentive and engaged, and I appreciate that. I also want to send a special welcome to our friends in the overflow room. I'm sorry that we can't see your faces, but we look forward to seeing you in the rest of the conference and are very glad that you're here. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Lynn Mahaffie. I work in the Office of Post-Secondary Education that does the policy work for the Federal Student Aid Office. And I am joined at the table for the first time by Cynthia Hammond, who works in the Policy Liaison Office in the Federal Student Aid Office. And Cynthia, I have a question for you. I noticed this morning that you are wearing some pretty fancy running shoes today.
I am, Lynn. Ever since Jeff Baker retired, I have been running from meeting to meeting.
Anybody remember Jeff Baker? Yes. Those of you who are new to this conference, Jeff Baker is a bit of an institution at the department who retired earlier this year. And among the many, many things he did is every year he did the federal update at this conference with me and with my predecessors. And he was a bit of a rock star, so it's very strange to be up at this desk without him here.
It is. And nobody misses Jeff more than I do. But I brought something to make us all feel a little bit more comfortable.
Now we all feel at home. But seriously, it is a pleasure to be here with Cynthia. Cynthia has been an integral part of our team for many years, and she has done many presentations at these conferences and has worked closely with me over the years, so I'm very pleased to be here with her. So, need the presentation. There we go. I just wanted to start with doing a regulatory update. As Secretary DeVos mentioned, since the very beginning of this administration, we have been focused on reducing burden throughout the federal government. About a month into his presidency, President Trump signed an executive order that asked every agency to be looking at how we can reduce burden on the American people. In response to that, the U.S. Department of Education created a regulatory reform task force to look at how we can be reducing burden. I have the honor of serving on that task force for the Office of Post-Secondary Education. The task force consists of both senior career and political staff who are working together to look across all of our offices at how we can reduce burden. Our charge is to identify regulations that eliminate jobs or inhibit job creation, are outdated, unnecessary, or ineffective, impose costs that exceed benefits, or create a serious inconsistency or conflict with other goals of this initiative. As part of this process, it is very critical for us to get feedback from the public. We need to know how we can reduce burden, what things are most burdensome for you, what ideas you have for things that we can be doing better. Department-wide, we posted a notice in the Federal Register seeking comments on how we can reduce burden, and we got a very good response to that, some of which related to post-secondary ed, much of which did not. In addition to that, every office is engaging with their specific constituencies. On the post-secondary side, we held 2 public hearings, one in Salt Lake City and one in Washington, D.C. earlier this fall, and we got a lot of input through those hearings. Much of it was on our financial aid regulations, some of it was on Title IX, and we've shared that information with our Office of Civil Rights. We are very serious that we need your input, especially from this group here, which is where the rubber meets the road. You are making this happen every day, so we really need to hear from you and learn how we can do better by you. To that end, as the Secretary mentioned, Kathleen Smith, who is our Acting Assistant Secretary in the Office of Post-Secondary Education, and I will be holding 3 listening sessions. It is session 15 on your program, and we encourage you to come and tell us what is most burdensome for you, how we can best do things to make it easier while continuing to have the programs run efficiently. This is a really important exercise with post-secondary ed in particular, because as you know, much of our regulatory work is subject to a provision that requires us to do it through negotiated rulemaking. So in addition to identifying what needs to be changed, we need to prioritize because we won't be able to do everything at once. So the Regulatory Reform Task Force has had 3 initial focuses since the beginning of the administration. The first is to eliminate outdated guidance. The second, as the Secretary mentioned, is borrower defense to repayment. And the third is gainful employment. With respect to the elimination of outdated guidance, we had a committee work and look through all of the Dear Colleague letters we have posted on IFAP to determine whether any were outdated and whether they could come down. We identified 398 Dear Colleague letters that were outdated, and we are currently in the process of marking them as historical records on IFAP. This will mean that those letters are still available to the public to see, but it will be very clear that institutions do not need to continue to follow this guidance. It was kind of a cleaning out the attic exercise for us. It was a good effort for us to go and see. We had a lot of very old things up there, and it's now clear that those are outdated and don't need to be followed. Our second big emphasis has been borrower defense to repayment of student loans. At the end of the previous administration, we published final regulations that were scheduled to go into effect on July 1 of 2017. Those regulations created a new federal standard for borrower defense, prohibited mandatory arbitration clauses, and required disclosure of repayment rates in certain circumstances. This administration would like to rethink that, to think about how we can create a clear and streamlined process that protects both students and taxpayers. In order to do that work, we have delayed implementation of the 2016 rules. We published 3 notices. The first postponed the effective date pending the outcome of some outstanding litigation we have on these regulations. The next one, we published an interim final regulation that delayed the effective date of these regulations until July 1 of 2018. We also published a notice of proposed rulemaking soliciting comment on delaying it until July 1 of 2019 when we would have new regulations go into effect. We solicited comments both on the interim final rule and the notice of proposed rulemaking. Those comments were due on Friday, and we're now reviewing them to consider whether to publish final regulations to delay until July 1 of 2019. The provisions delaying implementation did not apply to some provisions of those regulations, including provisions relating to documentation for discharges relating to the death of the borrower, mandatory administrative forbearance and suspension of collection for FFEL loans when the borrower intends to file a borrower defense claim. They also don't apply to consolidation of nursing student loans and nursing faculty loans or provisions relating to severability or technical changes. So in the meantime, we are working hard to rethink these regulations and work on creating a better framework. We formed a negotiated rulemaking committee that's looking at a variety of issues, including whether there should be a federal standard, and if so, what that federal standard should look like, the process for adjudicating these claims. We're looking at some limited aspects of financial responsibility with respect to borrower defense. We're looking at arbitration agreements, closed school and false certification discharges, guarantee agency collection fees, and subsidized usage period recalculation. We have also created a subcommittee under this negotiated rulemaking committee that is tasked with considering 2 technical issues relating to financial responsibility that are resulting from changes to the FASB standards. This subcommittee will be reporting back to the full negotiated rulemaking committee, where these issues will be debated, negotiated, and voted upon. The borrower defense negotiations have started. The first round was a couple of weeks ago. We have a very strong committee that represents a broad array of interests and sectors, and they have been engaged in some tough and lively discussions on these issues. The committee will meet 2 more times, once in January and once in February. The subcommittee has also met once, and they are expected to meet 2 more times during this process. And finally, the third priority, gainful employment. As I'm sure all of you are aware, in 2014, we issued regulations that went into effect on July 1 of 2015 that created a debt-to-earnings ratio to determine whether gainful employment programs prepare students for gainful employment in a recognized occupation, as well as creating a number of reporting requirements and other things. In March, the department allowed additional time until July 2017 for institutions to comply with 2 provisions of the gainful employment regs. One is the alternate earnings appeal, and the other is the disclosure template. The administration is now looking at whether we can streamline these regulations and whether there's ways of reducing the burden surrounding them. We have formed a negotiated rulemaking committee. They will meet for the first time next week, so we're really looking forward to having them come to Washington to start this discussion. They will also meet in February and March. Yesterday, we posted issue papers to our website that will describe the issues that are going to be considered by this committee. So if you're interested in that, they are up on our website and available. A couple other issues I wanted to mention to you. One is, as most of you know, the Federal Perkins Loan Program Extension Act of 2015 extended the Perkins Loan Program through September 30th of 2017. It also eliminated grandfathering of students after the new extension and prohibited further extensions of the program. I want to highlight a few dates for you relating to the Perkins wind down. For graduate students, schools may not award new Perkins loans to graduate students after September 30th of 2016 and may not make subsequent disbursements on loans after June 30th of 2017. For undergraduate students, institutions may not make new loans after September 30th of 2017, and no subsequent disbursements on those loans after June 30th of 2018. We published a Dear Colleague letter on October 6th that goes into some details about the Perkins Loan Program. To highlight a couple things from that letter, the Department of Education will begin collecting the federal share of the revolving fund after submission of the 2019-20 FSAP. I want to stress that institutions are not required to liquidate their Perkins loan portfolios, but if they choose to do so, they should submit their intent to liquidate through the ECB system. There's a lot more details here, and if you're wanting to know more about this program, please plan to attend breakout session number 20. Tammy Garofano and Barbara Hoblitzel will be sharing a lot more detail about the Perkins Loan Program, so I encourage you to go if you're interested. And finally, I wanted to end my part of the presentation on a happy note that the Secretary shared as well. The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2017 reestablished the year-round Pell. So students may now receive up to 150% of their scheduled award for an award year. And this is effective for the 2017-18 award year. I wanted to flag that how it relates to the summer of 2017. For institutions that consider the summer of 17 as a trailer to the 16-17 year, students would not be eligible to receive the additional Pell. But if the institution considers the summer to be a header to the 17-18 year, they could award additional year, Pell for that award year. In terms of student eligibility, students must be enrolled at least half-time during the period when they will get the additional Pell. However, if after disbursement they fall below at least half-time, that does not render them ineligible. The Pell calculations and formulas remain unchanged, but I do want to flag that the additional Pell does count towards their lifetime eligibility. And again, if you want to know more, we have a session on this, session 19. Carney McCullough and Marie Fitzpatrick will be providing more information on this, so I encourage you to go to section 19 if you want to learn more. And with that, I will turn it over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Lynn. I have one more slide on Pell for you. We are currently under a continuing resolution, which means we have just enough money to keep the government operating until December 8th. At that time, Congress will either pass an appropriations bill or will pass another continuing resolution to keep both the Department of Education and the rest of the government operating. I worked on Capitol Hill for my senator for 7 years before coming to federal student aid, but it's really hard to predict what's going to happen these days. The president's budget requested level funding for the Pell Maximum Award. I cannot tell you what Congress is going to do or when we at the department will look into our crystal ball, or maybe that big giant magic 8-ball that Jeff Baker brought out last year, which we still have in our offices, by the way. Anyway, I can't tell you the exact day where we will publish a Pell payment schedule for 18-19. What I can tell you is if we were to publish it today, it would be identical to the 17-18 Pell payment schedule. Robin already talked about some of the things that FSA did regarding the hurricanes. When we realized the severity of Hurricane Harvey, folks at the department got together and updated the Dear Colleague letter. Gen 1708 provides guidance on what flexibilities we can provide. So if you ever find your school or a student at your school that has been impacted by a major disaster that FEMA has declared for individual assistance, take a look at Gen 1708. This year, it wasn't just the hurricanes, but the California wildfires that qualified as well. The most important thing you can do is get in touch and stay in touch with your regional school participation team. Let us know how we can help you. In the days, weeks, and going on months now since these disasters struck, we have received requests for hundreds of waivers and have granted as many of them as we legally can. We want to work with you to help your students. In addition to the Dear Colleague letter, the Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Maria Education Relief Act of 2017 was enacted in September. This law was focused on the campus-based programs. It provides the Secretary with waiver authority for how we distribute the money, as well as an extension of the deadline by which funds can be reallocated under the campus-based aid programs. I'll talk more about this on the next slide, but this legislation was passed before the wildfires got as bad as they eventually were, and it only applies to the hurricanes. So unlike the Dear Colleague letter that applies to any disaster that FEMA declares for individual assistance, either now or into the future, this legislation is only applicable to these 3 hurricanes. And of course, we continue to work with Congress on additional flexibilities for the Title IV programs. So campus-based funding. We distributed $7.6 million in FSCOG supplemental money on September 28th to schools directly impacted by the 3 hurricanes. Kudos to our campus-based team who worked extra long hours to get that money out as quickly as they actually did. For work study, you may recall that for Hurricane Katrina, we distributed money not only to the schools directly impacted by the hurricanes, but also where students who were impacted ended up. Even as more and more schools in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands are able to provide classes once more, there are also schools all over the country that are taking in students or may have already had students attending their schools whose families were impacted by these terrible disasters. We're finalizing the numbers now, but before the end of the year, we expect to distribute $10.4 million in work-study money to over 900 schools that were either directly impacted or who have more than a few impacted students. In addition, there'll be more money distributed in February when we sweep unexpended but unreturned funds from the work-study accounts. In an ordinary year, this is money that would be returned to the Treasury. But this year, thanks to this special legislation, we're able to distribute that money out to you as well so that you can give it to students who were impacted by these storms. Both work-study and FSCOG include an institutional share and a federal share. We're using the authority in this new legislation to waive the institutional match for an institution located in the affected area or one that has enrolled students from the affected areas. We're working on a Dear Colleague letter on this, and you should see more information on the waivers in a future communication. So let's talk about correct and timely reporting and data accuracy. I don't know if this is a growing problem or just one that I've been more aware of in recent years, but I want to talk about correct and timely reporting. The data you provide to the Department of Education impacts students' lives. How much loan they have to repay, are they still eligible for aid, but it also is used to construct various waivers, or various measures, such as the scorecard, gainful employment, disclosures. It's imperative that the data that you provide to the department be of the highest quality. So what do we mean when we say data quality? Completeness. Are you reporting all of the data that you should be reporting? For your FSAP or NSLDS, are you reporting on all of the students in those programs that you should be reporting? Are you providing all the requested data? We have had program-level enrollment reporting since 2014, and yet schools are still reporting on some, but not all, of their students at a program level. Accuracy. Are you providing the correct zip code, credential levels, program dates, program lengths, and other information associated with the students at the program that you are reporting? For GE reporting, are you providing accurate tuition and other financial figures? For both GE and NSLDS enrollment reporting, are you reporting the accurate program lengths? And then consistency. Are you using the same definitions and methodologies to capture the data across all programs? Are fields that parallel each other, for example, the zip code, credential level, program length measurement, are these being reported consistently between GE and NSLDS enrollment reporting and COD? And data quality reviews. Your review of the data for completeness, accuracy, and consistency should be frequent and ongoing as you build, batch, and provide your data to the department. The earlier in the process you find any data quality issues, the easier they will be to mitigate. And it's not too late. Reporting data correctly to the department is a requirement, but so is correcting your data once you find an error. So I encourage all of you to look at your data and make sure that it is correct. And let me give you a few examples about some of the data issues and problems that we've been seeing. So the first is with COD. Unless the academic design of your associate's degree or bachelor's degree program is significantly different than the traditional 60-credit associate degree program or 120 bachelor's degree program, You should be reporting these programs as 2 years or 4 years. Many schools continue to report these programs as 24 months or 48 months, which is in most cases incorrect. Students will not have their 150% subsidized usage period calculated correctly, and other statistics that we calculate using these numbers will end up being wrong. What you're reporting for GE, COD, and NSLDS enrollment reporting should all be consistent. Now, Perkins loan reporting to NSLDS. Loan status updates should be reported to NSLDS monthly. I've seen loans that have been left in in-school status for 20 years. Not the usual 4 to 6 years it takes students to complete a bachelor's degree these days, 20 years. In addition, schools should be requesting reconciliation reports to review and update their NSLDS records for their Perkins loans on a regular basis. For the FSA, many of these numbers are cumulative, so they can't just be rolled over from the year before. And the corrections deadline for the FSA is December 15th. As you may have heard, we're transitioning to a new system for ECB. So absolutely no corrections can be made after December 15th. The data must be true and correct as of that date. If you've not heard about the transition to the new system or just want to learn more, we do have a session on that where you can get all the details. I mentioned last year, and I'll mention it again this year, data quality and security is something that the department will be stepping up our enforcement efforts. So it's vital that the data that you give us is accurate and that you're maintaining it in a secure system. And speaking of data security, schools and their third-party servicers are obligated under various federal and state laws to protect data used in all aspects of administering the Title IV student financial aid programs. The Higher Education Act, the Privacy Act of 1964, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, state data breach laws, privacy laws, the list goes on and on. There have been a number of Dear Colleague letters and electronic announcements in recent years discussing these issues as well. FSA now has a cybersecurity compliance information page that consolidates information on this topic, and that page is what you're seeing on the slide. Why should you care? Because starting in 2018, information security safeguards at your school will be audited to ensure administrative capability. This page has lots of useful information to make sure that your school is ready. You can reach this through IFAP, and in addition, we have a session at this conference. They'll give you a lot more detailed information. The presentation is called Post-Secondary Institution Data Security Overview and Requirements. And there'll be folks in the Resource Center that can answer specific questions as well. It will be offered twice tomorrow and again on Thursday in the American Seminar Room. If you do not feel you are the right person for this, I would really recommend you figure out who at your school is the right person and have them watch the recording of this session. Although, as Tina would say, we are all responsible for data security. None of us wants to be the one at our school on the news for a data breach or your access to FSA systems to be halted as a result of lax controls over student data. But data security is not just about bad people breaking into your system. It's also about the way you use the data and who you give access to the data. For example, we've noticed an increase in entities using data in NSLDS for other purposes. Institutions must ensure that third-party servicers use NSLDS data only for the Title IV functions for which the servicer is contracted to perform on behalf of the institution. You are responsible for the actions of your third-party servicers. And we can and will initiate administrative actions against a school if a third-party servicer that you authorize to use NSLDS uses it for a purpose that they were not authorized to do so. In the next few weeks, all destination point administrators must confirm who has access from your school. So this would be a good time to take a look at who you're authorizing to use their systems and make sure they're still the right people. I'm not trying to scare you. I just want to impress on all of you how serious an issue data security is. And finally, because I cannot get in the front of a room full of financial aid response officers and not talk about gainful employment, let's talk about gainful employment. Lynn shared what we're doing in terms of negotiated rulemaking and the new regulations. I want to share with you where we are today, what you need to be aware of today to make sure your school is complying with the current regulations. First, reporting to NSLDS. By now, your school should have reported information on all Title IV students who enrolled in GE programs from the 2008-09 award year to the 16-17 award year. At least, I hope you guys did this by October 1st. If not, put it on your to-do list when you get back to your offices. There's still time to correct the data. After the first year, the department sent letters to presidents and CEOs when reporting was incomplete or not done on time. We referred some schools to program compliance for administrative actions. And although we have not done this in recent years, we are looking at the GE data. It's extremely important that both GE and other types of data that you report is accurate, complete, and on time. You really want us to have accurate data. If none of the reasons I mentioned earlier are resonating with you, correct your data for the simple reason that it's a lot easier to do it now than it will be later. We had several schools that had to explain to their presidents why they had reported inaccurate data to the department when their GE rates did not turn out as expected, when the money they were getting through their FSA was not turned out as they expected. You don't want to be in that situation. It's really important that the data that you provide us is correct. So next up is GE disclosures. The gainful employment disclosure deadline was delayed until July 1st, 2017. That's 2017. So those disclosures should already be on your program websites by now. The new requirements to directly distribute the GE template was delayed further, but the requirement to update the disclosure template and post that on your website is a current requirement. On this slide is a link to the current disclosure template. You can also find the Quick Start Guide on the website, and we have a help desk to answer any technical questions. Remember that the disclosure template for gainful employment is an annual update. So for 2018, we're working on updating that template right now. I don't have a release date yet, but once we do, we'll let you know through IFAP and give schools sufficient time to update and post their new disclosure templates. There are some changes, but there are not any new calculations that schools will have to do. And as I mentioned, we are going to give schools sufficient time to update the templates and post them. And GE certifications. Now, schools certified all of their gainful employment programs and that they met certain basic requirements when the regulations first went into effect. Currently, you only need to review those certifications when you either get a new PPA or something materially changes and you're updating the EAP, such as adding a new GE program or changing a program. For example, changing the SIP code or the credential level of a program would trigger the need for a new GE certifications. So unless you're doing something like that, unless something has materially changed, there's not anything new you need to do on GE certifications. When we released the debt to earnings rates at the beginning of this calendar year, if a program failed or was in the zone and you chose to do so, your school could have filed a notice of intent to appeal. We extended that deadline, but the extension was to October 6th. If you already sent in the notice by the deadline, documentation for that appeal is due on Thursday, February 1st, 2018. And more information on this process is in Gainful Employment Electronic Announcement number 108. This training conference provides so many opportunities to learn new things or to be reminded of things that you knew or thought you knew. Go to as many sessions as you can, and those that you cannot will be posted on our conference website later. But the joy of learning doesn't have to end there. See, I sound like an infomercial now. IFAP, our Financial Aid for Professionals website, has a wealth of information. That's where we post any new information as the rules or regulations change, as we get a new reporting schema. IFAP is the main way that we at Federal Student Aid communicate with schools. It's something you need to be keeping up with. There's also other resources as well. FSAtraining.info has FSA Coach. You can sign up for fundamentals training and quick takes. I just learned about these. These are 10 to 15-minute videos on specific topics. We also have some of the presentations done at regional conferences posted there. And one of our best and most underutilized resources is our training officers and institutional improvement specialists. Call them whenever you have a question. Those amazing Ask a Fed folks that can answer virtually any question you throw at them, those are talented training officers. They can't just sing the national anthem, they can also answer your financial aid questions. And I cannot say enough good things about our training officers. I used to work for Jeff Baker, so I know what I'm speaking of when I tell you these are 15 or so of the most knowledgeable people at the Department of Education when it comes to the overall administration of Title IV financial aid. They're a resource to you, not just at this conference, but throughout the year. Now, Lynn has hired away a couple of our training officers recently, so I'm sure she will agree that as we end this federal update, that we give a round of applause to our amazing training officers.
Thank you very much.